We're being recorded. Should have waited till after I got done talking, but we'll go for that. We want to thank Josh for being here and helping us out with this tonight, guys. Everybody needs to tell him thanks when they see him because we appreciate that, man. He knows a lot of stuff and he helps us out. We're glad to be involved with everything with these clinics that we do, and we try to figure out where we can help you guys out and do a better job for you all the time. We've also got Matt Leaks on from Nutrena, Cargill. He's going to be talking with us tonight. So with no further ado, I will just turn it back over to, you're going to go with Josh. We're going to turn the time over to Matt. Matt, if you want to take off and go, we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good, guys. So I'm happy. Yeah, can you hear me?
Before you begin, we can hear you great. If you need to share a screen or you want to do anything, we've made you a co-host, so you should have that option down at the bottom.
Yep, and we're going to share here in just 1 second. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and hopefully if I won't freeze or if you have any questions or whatever, we can drop down in the chat and I'll try and watch those, and hopefully Josh, you can watch for those too. Let's get some of those questions that we may have going through here. So I'm going to work on sharing a screen here real quick, and we'll see if that works. Let's see. Let me know when that is up. Does that, you guys can see that?
It's working.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll back up here just a second. When we're talking about show animals, one of the biggest things that we need to remember is genetics. When you're going to select your animals, you want to remember that you want something that has the genetic potential to be a great show animal and utilize the feed that we provide for those animals. Okay. So just quickly, my name there is Matt Leak, and that's my phone number if you guys want to jot that down, and also my email address. And we can talk about that at the end here. If you guys have any other questions that you'd ever want to reach out to me, and you're feel free to do that. And then again, at the end, we can kind of go through that again. Okay. So what is nutrition? And I'll just kind of scroll through this here a little bit and talk to you about, this is on the top, we can look at the animals themselves. And on the bottom, you can think of it as a human type of nutrition. So we're going to feed the optimal nutrition for, and I want you to think about these animals as almost being athletes. These show animals are going to be in the very, very prime of their lives when we show them. And just like that barrel horse there, or that steer is in the prime of its life, and just like a prime athlete would be in the Olympics or some sports, if you guys like the NFL or the NBA, those guys have nutritionists that feed each of them every day and help them to get the best of their genetic potential. And that's what we're going to try and do for these steers. Okay. Without proper nutrition, these animals are not going to be healthy. And when they're not healthy, not only will they not be happy and be good producers for us, but they're also not going to win any banners for us either. So it's very important that we make sure that our animals are healthy. Okay. There's 6 key nutrients that we need to focus on. And some of these things, I'm not sure exactly the age of the animal or the individuals that we're visiting with tonight. It looks like some are younger, and some, I'm sure some parents are on there. But one of the biggest things that we need to remember is these animals need water. They need fresh, clean water. And if they don't have that water, it's going to be the biggest contributing factor to them not being able to express their genetic potential and be what we want them to be. And I promise you that is number one. And a lot of people kind of forget about that, especially in the hot summer. They need fresh, clean water at all times. And then as we go down, probably in order of importance is protein, carbohydrates. Protein would be something like some of the hays that we're feeding and some of the supplements that we'll talk about here. Carbohydrates are some grains, and that's some of the supplements that we'll talk about. And then fats, vitamins, and minerals. Those are things that are kind of like to top everything all off. But really, the core nutrients that they need is that water, protein, and carbohydrates. Okay, this comes in several different feed forms. If you guys see some of the products that we have, you'll see that they do come in different feed forms. And kind of from top to left here, top left and kind of moving forward, we got, those are crumbles, then you have a meal, and then pellets. and some nuggets. And then the bottoms are like textured feeds. We call these textured, where they have grains, and then pellets that generally have those mineral supplementations, and then also the protein inside the pellet. So just wanted to know that it comes in all sorts of different forms, but really we're trying to do the same thing, as feed these animals to the most for their potential. Okay, so Show Edge is the product that we have that, and we've had a lot of success with it. It's done very, very well. And partly because it's a complete feed. And what we mean by complete feed is that's everything that you need to feed, with the exception of a couple of these supplements we'll talk about here in a second. But that's what you need to feed your animal, along with a forage. And it will have the protein, the energy, and the minerals that that animal needs, depending on its body weight. And we'll talk about that a little bit, for what they need to be not only healthy, but to be great show animals. This is all supplemented, or all formulated for different type of supplements. So on the bottom there's 20. So I'll back up here. The complete feeds come in 50-pound bags, and the bottom supplements there, they come in 20-pound bags. And you don't need to worry about sweepstakes, because we're not talking about pigs tonight. But the Full and Fresh is a fiber supplement. And then the bottom one, the Power Fat, is just like that. Even though the fat's spelled funny, it is a fat supplement. And that gives those animals energy. And these are products that we'll use kind of towards the end, when we're finishing the animals, to make their hair coats where they need to be, and a couple other things. Okay, so here are some tips about feeding. So we want fresh feed daily, and including, and a lot of people forget about this part, including hay. Because if we don't kind of clean out what they didn't eat from the day before, there could either be some bad hay that was set in the manger, or they just kind of sorted through it and they didn't quite finish it. You can throw that out. You guys can feed it to something else, some other animals you may have. And that's going to help improve their efficiency as well. And then, like we talked about before, we've got to have water. And if we don't have water, especially in the summer, they absolutely will not eat. And I know I'm not talking about, we know you guys, provide water to the animals or they die, right? But we're talking about free choice water and fresh water at all times. The other thing that's really important is if we feed these show animals individually, and individually, I mean, like in show pans, you can buy different pans for them. If you guys have 2 or 3 or 4 animals that you're feeding at the same time, some are bullies and some will kind of push others out of the way. And so you want to make sure that you measure out exactly what that animal needs, and then you feed them in a show pan, so you know that they're getting the intake. And that helps from a couple different perspectives. One is we know it's getting into them, and they're not fighting with another animal for what, maybe there's some bullies and they took what the other animal wanted. And then also, if your animal's off feed or happens to be sick, you'll know that immediately, because you're feeding them individually in these pans, in these show pans. And then the other thing is, if you're doing some supplements or anything like that with the Show Edge, then you want to make sure you mix that all the way through, so they don't be picky, or we call that sorting. And sorting is pretty important. So, and then here's the other thing is, you want to feed at home just like you're going to feed at the show, or vice versa. Don't switch it up on them. Like, we want to feed them either 2 or 3 times a day, and in those feed pans and everything else. So they're used to that. So once they get to the show, it's just business as usual. They'll go to eating just like they would as if they were at home. And that really helps these animals transition over. And then the other thing is to weigh your animals. This is extremely important. Sometimes we lose track of where those animals are at. And then also, as we'll talk about here in a minute, the intake and how much we're feeding is important as well. And we don't know how much to feed unless we really know kind of what they weigh. And I know it's difficult to, not everyone has scales that they can run them over or whatever else, but at least periodically, if you can load them in the trailer, and that'll help them kind of know what's going on when they go to the show anyway, and run them across the scale or something, so you can kind of get an idea of what they weigh. You can also tape them. That's not quite as accurate, but there are some tapes where you can run around the body of the animal, and that gives a pretty good estimate of what they weigh. And that would work pretty well too. Okay, talking about some of these supplements, besides the Show Edge, as we're getting these animals closer to the show season, if you look kind of at the bottom there, the ingredients include flax, beet pulp, and omega-3s and vitamin E. And this is the same sort of thing that makes our hair and our fingernails and our coats shiny as well. Same thing for the beef animals. Their hair coat will get nice and shiny. And it also helps with a lot of energy, helps get them the bloom that they need for show. And if you have an animal that's a little bit underweight, you can kind of push this power fat supplement as well and get them to catch up pretty quickly because it gives them a lot of energy. And then the Full and Fresh is very similar, but it helps with gut feel and kind of to help them get that deep body, that deep chest and fill out. And that's basically a fiber ingredient, and that would be available too. Okay, so as far as feeding and how much they should be eating 3% of their body weight per day. And we talked about earlier splitting that up in 2 to 3 feedings. The reason we do that is if we just only feed these animals once a day, they're ruminants. And so as we put this grain or this supplement in front of them once a day, they get really hungry and they scarf it all down really quickly, but it gives them indigestion. And we call that acidosis because it drops the pH of the rumen really low and creates kind of a reflux. And when you drop the pH too low, they could get acidosis and then they don't want to eat and they get sick and they get diarrhea. So the more times that we can break up the feedings, the better off they are, because then they only eat a little bit at a time. And so 2 to 3 feedings is awesome. And then of course they need their forage. And we try to avoid alfalfa. It's better to feed a grass hay if possible. Alfalfa, especially really good alfalfa, can cause bloat, and they can also cause them to kind of go off feed. And if you've ever raised animals before and you've seen cows or steers kind of eat the grain one day and then they go back off and eat the grain another day and they go back off feed, a lot of that's due to some of the alfalfa and some bloat and then some of that acidosis we talked about. We're going to try and push for 2 to 3 pounds a day. And that's kind of why it's important to weigh periodically, because then you know if you're on track or not. And obviously we want to shoot for 3 pounds. If the genetic potential is there and you're supplementing with the right products, they will hit that 3 pounds. And as you weigh those animals, you'll know they're getting close. And then the younger calves require a little bit more protein because they're still growing. They have that growth requirement, whether it's bones, muscle, whatever else. And towards the end of the finishing period, you can kind of pull the protein back a little bit and add that fat that we talked about on the power fat. Okay. I don't think we're going to do anything on breeding versus marketing. I think most everyone on here would be a marketing finish. But our target weight there would be 1,250 to 1,350 pounds, kind of depending on the breed and what you've got there. So this is the Show Edge calf feed that's available at the co-op. And this has been balanced by many nutritionists within Nutrena and Cargill for the optimal growth and performance. And we do that with specific amino acids, proteins, and carbohydrates. So this is exactly what your animals need. And it's not just something that we've just thrown together willy-nilly. This is something that has a lot of research behind it. And it's been proven time and time again that these animals really do well on this feed. So it's something that you'll want to make sure that you watch really close to the 12% protein, 18 fiber, and 3% fat. So as you move that animal as it's eating more and more as it gets bigger, then you're going to want to push that supplement even higher. So we talked about this at 3% of their body weight. So for example, at 3% of a body weight on a 1,000-pound animal, that's 30 pounds per day. And that's 30 pounds of dry feed, dry weight. We call that dry matter. And so that would include your hay and your Show Edge that you'd be feeding. And then we'll get into some daily care. And these are some things that I'm sure you guys know about. And I think we may talk about them here a little bit later, but exercise, walk your animals as much as possible. And even besides the nutrition part of it, the more you work with those animals, the better chance you're going to have in the ring of them following and understanding directions and what you want them to do. And then washing and working that hair, that help the fat supplement will really help with the hair coat. But as you wash and dry it and make sure that you use products like Revive and those type of things to put that shine back into the animal's hair coat. It will really help. And then a nighttime environment versus daytime environment. I know a lot of people, and we'll get into this maybe later, but put fans on them and keep them cool. And that really keeps that hair growing as well. So with that, I would entertain any questions, or else maybe just turn the time over to Josh. We can do questions later. I'm not sure what the format was, Josh, but you can let me know.
Hey, Matt, awesome. Thank you so much. No, I think right now, if we've got some questions, I think now is a great time. If there's anybody that wants to either unmute your microphone while we've got Matt, our specialist, here with us. This is a guy that knows his stuff when it comes to feeding. So please take a moment and ask him some questions. If you are having problems with your microphone, go ahead and type into the chat box. We'll watch the chat box. If not, go ahead and just
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm wondering, is Purina feed, is that good for 4-H calf?
Okay, so Purina is a similar feed to what the Show Edge is. So Show Edge is
Okay.
made by Nutrina, and then Purina has their
Okay.
own line. And I'm not going to bag on Purina; they do a pretty good job too. But you can get those at the co-op. So go to the co-op, and Zach will hook you up with what you need there.
Okay.
good question. Do we have any other questions that anybody might want to ask right now?
Looks like there's a chat. There's a question.
It was me prompting people to type in there.
That's good.
Any other questions that you guys might have about steers? If you think of some, maybe we'll, oh, there's one. Piper, I saw you unmute. Did you have a question? Maybe not. Okay. So if you guys think of something, use the chat box or cut me off or do whatever. We'd like to, again, thank Matt for that great presentation on feed. And we've got this meeting recording. So if there's some things that maybe you really liked or you thought, oh, I can't remember exactly what he said, this will be back up on our extension website as soon as the recording hits the cloud. So we'll have that put up there probably in the next day or so. You guys can review everything that was presented. And I think that'll be a really good resource with that presentation and Matt's knowledge there. So I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. And I've just got a couple of things that I wanted to go over with everybody.
Hey, Josh.
Uh-huh.
This is Carlene. I have one question. Could you just explain to these kids what the rumen is? I don't know if they all understand that. Thank you.
Yes. Matt, do you want to explain it or do you want me to explain it?
Yeah, either way, I can attack that if you want me to. So
go ahead.
So the rumen, I like to think of it as a big old huge fermentation vat. And I know fermentation vat may not be familiar with most people, but just to call it a big old barrel. And that rumen, it takes all the feed, and there are bugs inside that rumen that digest all the hay, the alfalfa, the grass, the carbohydrates, the grains, whatever else we put in that rumen. Those bugs utilize that, and it ferments the feed, and those bugs grow as they eat that feed, and then it helps. And as soon as they get that, then it goes across the rumen wall into the small intestine and into the bloodstream, and that's how the cows get the energy. It's a little bit like how we are, except for we're monogastrics. So when we eat our food, we digest it just a little bit differently. But animals such as ruminants, bovine, they digest forages much better than we can digest our lettuce, if that makes sense. So.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Hey, so on the full and fresh, last year we couldn't get that. Has that changed? Because they told us, at least at the plant down here, that it was not available.
Yeah, I think we're going to be able to ship it in. If you guys want it and get it, we can get it brought in.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that while everybody was on. And knock everything down.
All right. So we're going to just go ahead and cover a few points that I think are kind of important to add on to or reemphasize what Matt has already taught us when it comes to your project preparation. So one of the things I think is really important that sometimes we often forget, and a lot of you should already have your steers. If not, you'll be getting them soon. But we need to think about pen space. Okay, pen space should be a minimum of 100 square feet for their barn or their pen. And then they need to have an exercise lot that's about 200 square feet for each of your steers. So you need to make sure that all of that space is available for them, because that exercise and that movement is really important for them. The other thing to think about, and I wanted to emphasize this because as I've went around and been able to visit with a lot of you, I've noticed that maybe this isn't the case, but you want to make sure to provide about 2 feet, okay, 20 to 24 inches of feeder space for your calf. So when we get them all up there and they come running up and they want to consume those good concentrates and that roughage like Matt talked about, we want to make sure that they actually have the space to be able to do it and that they're not being pushed out. Sometimes we'll find that if we're feeding multiple steers at once and we don't have that adequate space, we'll have one that ends up getting really big, really fast, and really fat. And we'll have one that maybe just isn't in the same boat, that's being bullied out of that feed bunk space. And so we want to make sure we provide that for them. The other thing that we are having to deal with here in Utah and in Box Elder County is we never know what the weather is going to be like. We can go from a balmy 45 degrees in January to down to the negative temperatures. We can also go from frost in the morning on the grass to 95 degrees in the summertime. And so we need to make sure that we're providing adequate shelter for our steers, specifically to shelter them from the elements. So let them get out from under the snow and the rain and the sun, those types of things that are going to affect their ability to be comfortable. Okay, and Matt talked about on that final slide, he talked a little bit about hair growth and product and those types of things that play into your show calves. If they're getting too much wet and moisture and those types of things on them and not able to get out of the rain, you can experience rain rot and other things into that hair that you're trying to grow out, and you don't want to have those types of problems in your way. So make sure that you think about those facilities and the pen space that's provided for them, so that you can maximize the feed and the money and everything that you're putting into those calves. Again, this is just a little reference point here that kind of will reiterate what Matt already talked about. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on the nutrition portion, but one of the things I do want to spend some time on is the weighing portion. So Matt talked about your calf needing about 2 to 3% of its body weight in concentrates, along with the roughages of grain when it comes to the amount of feed. So how do we know how much grain then, if we know we should be feeding them 2 to 3%, what are the steps? Who wants to be brave and tell me what are the steps for us to be able to figure out how much grain we should really be feeding? Somebody want to unmute their microphone and be brave and tell me what steps you would go through to be able to make sure you're feeding the right amount of grain? Anybody? There's got to be somebody out there that's brave. How about we talk about weighing? So if we need to find out feed, we need to find out how much our calf weighs. And that starts from the very beginning. So in order for us to figure out how much grain or concentrate we need to be feeding, we need to figure out how much they weigh. So for example, if we get a calf that we're starting out, and let's say we get him and he's about 650 pounds, okay? That's our starting weight with our calf. Okay, 2% of 650 pounds is 13 pounds of grain. Okay, 3% of 650 pounds is 19.5 pounds of grain. So that's really where we need to start. You guys can't just go out and say, well, I'm just going to fill up this bucket and hope that it's about where I need to be, because you might be feeding too much, right? And cause that acidosis and things that Matt talked about. Or you might be feeding too little, which will affect the ability for that calf to gain and to grow, okay? So make sure that you're regularly weighing your calves, and then in the same, make sure that you're regularly weighing your feed, so your grain or your concentrate, okay? Go ahead and get a scale, put a bucket on there, zero it out so that you're not getting the weight of the bucket in there with the grain, and then pour that grain in there and figure out where you're at, and figure out how much, how many buckets or how many pounds are going to equal what you need. Okay. Sometimes one of the best suggestions that we have is, if you want to figure out how many, maybe a pound or 2 pounds of grain is on a bucket, and take a black Sharpie and draw a line where that grain hits on that bucket, and then you don't have to weigh it every time, but you'll know that that's a pound, and then you can utilize that to do your grain correctly. You can even do it in quarter pounds or half pound increments, and that will help you to be able to determine how much you need to feed. The other thing that's really important that Matt talked about is roughages, okay? And I want to re-emphasize roughages. Those are extremely important for your calf to be able to digest and to maintain the microbial bacteria in the rumen, have that be healthy. Okay, so all their gut health and everything else is so important with that roughage. Okay, and so make sure that you're doing that. Also, because of the generally adequate protein percentages and things that you're going to find in your feeds like the Nutrena Show Edge, you're going to want to make sure that you don't over protein them with maybe feeding too hot of an alfalfa type of a hay. As far as your roughage is concerned, you're going to want to have maybe more of a grass type or a grass alfalfa mix. They're going to tend to do a lot better on that with their roughage amounts. We're going to go next to talk a little bit about weight checks and predictions, okay? Now, not only should we be weighing our calves so we know how much grain we should feed them, but we should be weighing our calves so that we can have a prediction as to where we need to be. Okay, calves are going to gain at different rates. They're individuals, just like we are individuals as human beings. Some of us gain really fast, some of us don't gain very fast, and so on. And so we need to keep a good record that showcases where how much gain our calves are gaining per day. That then is going to help us to determine, do we need to increase the percentage of grain that we're feeding them, or maybe they're gaining so fast we might want to decrease. It also will help us to determine if we want to use those extra supplements that Matt talked about to help us in either direction that we might need to go. Just to give everybody an idea, right now an ideal steer market weight is somewhere around 1,350 pounds, 1,350 maybe up to 1,400, okay? And that's what we would call ideal. The minimum weight at the Box Elder County Fair for a steer is 1,225 pounds, okay? And so we need to have those numbers in the back of our mind, because we want to be shooting to make sure that we're picking a calf and that we're feeding a calf that's going to make those weight requirements. Now, we have created a fun little calculator that you guys can go and visit. If you search in your Google searches, beef weight calculator USU, you will find that we have these calculators that have been created to help you just plug in the numbers, and you can take an average. You can say, okay, my calf is this much. You can see right here from 2018, we did some data on the calves, and we found out that the calves were gaining 2.45 pounds of gain per day. So that's how many pounds they were gaining per day. And so what you can do is you can say, well, maybe my steer will do a little bit better, or maybe it'll do a little bit less than that. but just to give an idea of what your starting point is, you can put your current weight in there. You can put that 2.45 in there, and then you can, it'll tell you, and your days until the fair, and then it will tell you what your predicted weight is going to be. Okay, now that's all hunky-dory, but that'll give you just a general idea of where you're at. The actuals will come into play when you do an average daily gain calculator. So there's people that have access to scales all of the time. They might decide that they want to do this weekly. Some of you may decide maybe monthly you're going to do this, but what essentially you'll do is you'll take the beginning weight, maybe it was a month ago, maybe it was a week ago, and then you'll put it right here. You'll take your current weight, whether it's a week later, a month later, and put it there, and then the days that we're in between. So it's at 7 days or 30 days or whatever it is. Then what will happen is that average daily gain will be calculated for you, and it will tell you whether you're at 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, whatever your average daily gain might be. If you do that consistently enough, you're going to find that steer, as long as you're keeping those concentrates and those percentages that Matt talked about in front of them, you're going to find that they're going to be pretty consistent in that gain, or they should be. Then after that, you can start to take that back to this prediction calculator, and instead of using that average from the Box Elder County Fair in 2018, you can start using that average that you're gaining on your own steer to give you a better gauge as to where you're going to land. Now again, we don't want to be shooting for 12.25. We want to be shooting for 13.5, 1,400 pounds. We want those steers big, and we want them to be competitive, and we want them to grade well. That 12.25 should be a fallout mark where maybe your calf was sick, or maybe there was something that happened to prevent them from getting up to that 13.5 range. But always have that 13.5, 1,400 pound range in your mind as you're using these prediction calculators and these gain calculators. Hey, so some other things that I wanted to talk with you a little bit about is starting now. Most of you, again, have already got your calves and have selected them, but I think it's really, really important that you, if you haven't already, start with the halter breaking. I've seen both ways in the years that we've been here. When we do our taggings, we see some people that'll come right across the scale with a calf that's already broke, and they're easy to handle. Consequently, by the time fair comes, because that breaking has already happened when they were small, they're gentle, they're good calves, they've got quiet eyes, and they're what we'd like to see. And we have kind of the opposite, where we'll have people come through and we have calves that are wild and crazy and causing a fuss, and they make it difficult for everybody. And the bigger that they get, the more that you feed them, the harder that they're going to get to halter break. And it's still possible when they're bigger, but it's really recommended that you start doing that now. It'll make it a lot more enjoyable experience for you with your calf if you can get them broke now and work with them a little bit better. Plus, right now the temperatures are cool, and it's nice outside as far as cow temperature is concerned. If you really wait until the spring or the summer when our temperatures are hot, that puts that much more extra stress on them, and the heat added to that's going to cause a lot of issues as far as their overall weight gain and how they're feeling. Matt gave a really good diagram about training hair. Remember, if you've got these big old fluffy calves, that you ought to be washing them regularly and blowing them out and then working with that hair, especially if you've purchased some specifically for that type of a thing. It makes a big difference, and as far as our coat sheen and everything, and then the hair that you're able to fit and work with when it comes to fair time. The other thing is to start now, as a reminder, to start now feeding accurately. Don't say, well, I guess I'll weigh this feed in about a month, and I'll weigh these calves in about a month. That's going to be about a month's worth of time that you're going to be behind. And as we talked about, as far as average daily gain, that could equate to 60 to 90 pounds of gain that you could lose if you don't start now. The other thing that I wanted to point out to everybody is that we have some really good resources that we have put up onto our website from last year that will help you as you visit. You can go into our archives, and I'm actually going to see if this will open up for me. And it looks like it's going to work. Can you guys see that okay? Can I get a thumbs up? You guys see my screen okay? There you go. All right, perfect. So this will show you here on this screen, here's the steer section, but we have a selection video. We have some disease prevention information. We have a really good fitting video, and the fitting video is one that I specifically would like to point your attention to, because the products and things that you're going to want to plan on are going to be coming from that fitting video. And so that'll give you a really good idea about working the hair and looking at those different products and the things that you're going to want to be interested in. And I think it's really important to note that the co-op has a lot of these products available to you, and you'll see them right here behind me. We've got some sprays and sheen and all sorts of things like that. We've got some really nice show sticks here, okay? As you guys are halter breaking your calves and getting them used to you and things, it's not a bad idea to get them used to that show stick and get them used to the ideas of what that's meant to do and what it's there for, especially when they're little, because you can handle them a lot easier. The other thing that you're going to want to think about is you're going to want to make sure that you get yourself a show halter. Okay, now I wouldn't recommend trying to break your calves with the show halter. I think that a rope halter is more adequate and better for use there. But what I have found is I went around and I've judged shows and worked with people is that sometimes if they don't pull this show halter out and try it a few times at home, they end up running into big problems because the calf's just used to that rope halter. You throw a chain and you throw this leather type halter on there, and it makes them really uncomfortable because they're not used to it. So don't be afraid after you get your calf broke to start working with them every now and again in a safe setting with this show halter so that they know what it is. Remember that show halters come in all different colors. Okay, normally red calves or red tinted calves that maybe kind of a smoky red type calf, a Hereford type calf, a red Angus type calf, or red Simi, those types of breeds. You don't want a red halter. Black steers, black smokies, black baldies, those types of calves, anything black, semis, anything like that, you're going to want more of the black halter to match. That's not a huge deal. If you got a red calf and a black halter, you know, I wouldn't tell you to go out and buy a new one unless you feel like doing it. But if you kind of plan on showing a certain type of calf and you're investing in those halters, that's just something that kind of sets them off just a little bit and looks really good in the show ring. The only other thing that I wanted to talk about to kind of re-emphasize some of the stuff that Matt was saying is this is just an example here of a dewormer, okay? And it's really, really important that you make sure that your calves are on a regular deworming schedule. These calves, if they are not, what ends up happening is ruminants in their digestive tract is the deworming schedule, or the worms or the parasites that get in them, the calf acts as a host. And what it ends up doing is it starts to eat away the nutrients that are very important for its gain. And so essentially, if you're not doing a regular deworming schedule, all the money and time that you're spending on those feed resources, essentially you're feeding a portion of that to the worms. So make sure that you put your calves on a regular deworming schedule. And the other thing to make very, very sure of is that you look at what's called a withdrawal period instructions on the box. Make sure generally around 35 to 40 days before the fair that you do not give any injections from that point on because of the overall meat quality. You want to make sure that there's no residual of that dewormer in the meat to taint it or cause any problems there. But I think that that's really, really important to think about. One thing that we often forget and we get busy is to do a deworming schedule, because it will make a difference in those calves, especially if you're bringing them from another breeder or another place. They will have their own forms of parasites, and you at your place, you may not know it, but you probably have your own form. And so it's nice to have that regular schedule there to take care of those. I again encourage everybody to please utilize those resources. Make sure that you weigh your calves, weigh your feed, provide the roughages, make sure, like Matt said, that they have plenty of water, make sure that you're warming them, and get started working with them right now while they're younger, because it's going to benefit you all in the end. With that, are there any questions that anybody might have for Matt or I before we end our meeting? Okay, at this time, we'll entertain questions. We're gonna stop the recording. Did you want to say anything?